Can I persuade you to join us for a drink? It's a tradition. Here, here.
Jar Jar, homie, my main man, quickly. Before the Separatists attack, get into the escape pod.
Hey! This is escape, then we're the pod.
Welcome back to Star Wars Escape Pod and another episode of What Happened, where we catch you up on the events of a singular spotlight-focused character from the Star Wars saga. And today we shine a light on Saw Gerrera, who's not only was introduced to us in Star Wars The Clone Wars, but made his first live-action theatrical appearance in Rogue One. And will also be showing up in the upcoming Disney Plus series, Andor. So, let's join Blake in the escape pod and get to the nitty-gritty on Saw Gerrera.
Another happy landing.
Saw Gerrera.
He fashions himself as our leader, though no one elected him.
Well, for now, we're in charge. And there is much to learn.
Hello, welcome back to the escape pod, Mr. Blake.
Chut, Josh. Chut.
Chut. That, everyone, is the co-host of Star Wars Escape Pod right there.
That's right. We do it right here on Star Wars Escape Pod.
That's right.
Well, chut to all you listeners.
We welcome a warm chut to everyone tuning into the show. So if you can chut your way over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, drop us a 5-star. That would be most gracious of you. And today we shine a spotlight on Saw Gerrera. So do you want to catch everyone up on what these What Happened episodes are? Because it's been a little while since we did one.
Sure, yeah. So these What Happened episodes, we've been kind of throwing these together just because the Star Wars galaxy is just getting so large now. Just Disney pumping stuff out. We got the animated stuff, we got comics, we got books, we got the films and live action shows. So it's hard to keep up. And a lot of characters are starting to make reappearances in the live action shows. So we've been attempting to go back in time and kind of just put together the story of all these characters so everyone's up to date as we go into the new material.
Yeah. And so, we've done characters like, oh my goodness, I think Quinlan Voss was one of them. At one point, I think we did Darth Maul and the Darksaber. We've done Boba Fett, Cad Bane, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
What happened with the Darksaber? That was a big thing when Mandalorian kind of picked up the threads where Star Wars Rebels left off, and we took everyone back to the story of where that came from and how it was introduced in Clone Wars and all that stuff. We did one on Tar Vizsla, Ben Solo, Kylo Ren. We did one for that. We did one for Echo when Bad Batch was starting to come out. Yeah.
We've done a lot of these.
We've done.
I didn't realize.
We did one for
I didn't realize there was
Bo-Katan.
this many.
Yeah, we did one for Bo-Katan when she showed up in Mandalorian.
I thought she was on there.
Yeah, and even more recently, we did one for Obi-Wan Kenobi, and we did another one for the Inquisitorius, which caught people up.
Did we do
on
Ahsoka?
Yeah, we did. We did do Ahsoka as well. Yeah, that was actually I think the first one that we did. So.
There we go.
Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Inquisitorius, those are two separate episodes, and Inquisitorius kind of got into the origins and the variety of Inquisitors running around hunting Jedi, and the Obi-Wan Kenobi one kind of got into a very overarching look at kind of where that character's been, because that's a character who's shown up in almost too many times to count when it comes to the stories. So of course, since then, an amazing book dropped, which was Star Wars Brotherhood. We had a really great time talking about that with Bryce, and I know that episode is actually, when this one comes out, it'll have recently dropped. So, spoilers for anyone who's thinking about reading that book. We kind of stylized it in a way that you don't really need to. We kind of dish out all our favorite parts, and I like talking to you guys about that book. That was really fun. So.
Yeah, it was just such a good throwback novel. It just really takes you back to early 2000s when the prequels were just the highlight of all of our fandom.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Quest of the Jedi, Jedi Apprentice, all those scholastic books that I grew up reading, really brought me back. I know that for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And let's not forget the reappearance of the ever elusive AJ.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The ever elusive AJ. We always try to get on the show, and finally made his appearance. So, today we take a look at Saw Gerrera. Now, I mentioned this before we kind of went on air, but I thought it was going to be kind of a quick, hey, let's chat, some quick things about some characters that might show up in Andor. When I had the idea to do Saw Gerrera, it's funny because the new trailer that just dropped as of we're doing this had not come out yet, and when it did come out, there was a slight confirmation that this was actually going to happen. So I'm kind of glad that I'm mentally pre-planned for this to happen, and I know we're going to take a look. I think maybe either today or another episode perhaps about this brand new Andor trailer reveal and kind of break that down. But Saw Gerrera, one of those characters that's just, he's kind of popped up here and there. Hard to keep track of the guy, he's just in all these different stories. So
we just keep bringing him back and putting him in different positions. I think they've done a really good job with that, because as we'll get into, he just kind of showed up as a Clone Wars side character. There's so many Clone Wars side characters that they're a big part of that story, for that story that you never really see them again. Mm-hmm. But with Saw, they just keep bringing him back for all these cool new moments and storylines. I think at least as far as Rogue One, I believe that had a lot to do with Pablo, I think. But we can get into that then. We get to the Rogue One stuff.
For sure. I'm going to run through the list really quick of kind of main events that we'll be talking about in scope of this character. These would be all the kind of staple things that have made this character's story arc what it is. Small appearances, big appearances, whatever it is. This is the list. There are more kind of indirect mentions from characters in other books and other Star Wars stories, because again, this saga is so big. There's obviously going to be way more. To get the full story, someone could just read top to bottom his Wikipedia page. And, we had the Supreme Emperor on from Wikipedia not that long ago. It was a great chat. I'm sure he'd be pleased for us to recommending going there but this is a podcast, so we're not just going to read off a website. Of course not. We got to make it fun.
But speaking of which, I do just want to quickly highlight on Wikipedia, there is a warning here saying that there's stuff that needs to be added to the current article. So if you are a Saw Gerrera enthusiast, I'm sure the Wikipedia group would really enjoy adding everything that if you know stuff that's missing. Yeah,
that's a great call. Join their volunteer group. I know they're always looking for people to help them out. So absolutely. So here's our list that we'll be kind of overviewing today. Starting with the Clone Wars, Season 5, Episode 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then we move on to the Bad Batch, Season 1, Episode 1. Then we move into Jedi Fallen Order. And then Solo, the novelization. Then Catalyst, a Rogue One novel. Then we move into Rebel Rising, which was also a Rogue One novel. Then Princess of Alderaan, which is a Princess Leia-focused book before the events of A New Hope. Then we go into Star Wars Rebels, Season 3, Episode 12, 13. And then we go through Season 4, Episode 3 and 4. Then finally, Guardians of the Whills, a junior novel. And absolutely finally, Rogue One at the very tail end. So we're going to be talking about all his appearances through all that stuff, starting with the Clone Wars. So first thing I got down. Described as a small band of rebels, Saw one of the leaders of a pack trying to take back his homeworld of Alderaan. Onderon, sorry, yes. Not Kind of blended the two
They're
up.
so the names are so similar.
Yes. Anakin suggests they need guidance to fight the Confederacy of Independent Systems, as they could give them soft targets while the Republic fights the main front. And Obi-Wan calls them terrorists, but Anakin calls them rebels. And I thought that was such an interesting moment in that first episode where we see the reference there, because later Anakin's, of course, the one fighting the rebels, and
Yeah.
Obi-Wan is one of them.
Yeah, and from the Empire's perspective, the Rebel Alliance are terrorists, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny how their perspectives change. Obi-Wan being somewhat more engrossed in the dogma view of the Jedi, and kind of looks at this situation as them training terrorists essentially. But Anakin kind of has a bit of a softer look on it. Goes, no, we're not training terrorists. We're training rebels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, they do such a good job that, as we'll get into here, Saw becomes a rebel for life, and then fights not only against the CIS, but also fights against the Empire later on.
Yeah, exactly. And furthermore, he also, in a sorts of ways, becomes a terrorist in his ways about going about his own version of what a rebellion is supposed to be.
Yeah, and I guess we get into it. That's the story arc that they haven't dove into enough yet, in my opinion, and really kind of showed that transitional phase. And I'm really hoping that shows up in the Andor series. I think that'd be a really cool storyline.
Part of the opinion of what I've got going on after having looked at our giant list of stuff here is you may be surprised as to how that transition might actually take place over the course of all of these things. Because you're right, there's no single moment in time where we see this transition. And I think part of doing this what happened kind of episode is we sort of do see it throughout all the minuscule things that he's done in some of these books and stuff like that are kind of not caught on screen. But yeah, how he starts off is very different from how it ends. And I think there's actually, surprisingly enough, I think the staple thing that really got to me when it came to blatantly pointing out the obvious with Saw Gerrera was actually from a Star Wars Rebels episode. And it was something that,
Oh, really?
that Kanan says. Yeah. Of all characters, the wise one. Anyway, so in this first Clone Wars episode, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka are sent unofficially, mind you, to train rebels on Andor, to be freedom fighters in their own accord to claim back their world. And Saw in training as a younger man is very interesting to see, because he's a bit of an impatient character, and he fails to perform some of the tasks that the Jedi have, or Rex, because Rex is also in the mix, are kind of setting him up to do, like throwing a thermal detonator beneath a destroyer shield, and a variety of other things like taking down a tank and all this and that.
Yeah, but I know throughout that arc, there's a lot of bravado. He's often thinking that he's the best. He wants to be the leader, but he's just constantly showed up by his younger sister.
Yeah, exactly. His younger sister, Steela. Yeah. But he does get the hang of things eventually and excels fairly efficiently. He doesn't have a lot of faith in the political system anymore because it's failed him. So what happens in the Clone Wars in this particular arc, and once again, spoilers, for anyone who hasn't seen Clone Wars or anything that we're about to talk about, but we're going to be inevitably spoiling some things. So the political system has failed him because what's happened is Dooku has allowed sort of a proxy leader to take over the elected king's rulership, and they have the real king imprisoned in this big, huge building which is the royal palace or whatever, but with no communication to the outside world. And this really kind of cruel younger guy is sitting on the throne thinking that he can just lead the planet with no consequences, and inevitably he started this backlash with Saw and his sister Steela leading a group of rebels against the droid forces on the planet. So it's
What's really funny is I just replayed KOTOR 2, and when you're on Onderon, that's essentially the same storyline that happens in the game. Yeah, it's pretty close. The only difference is there's a queen who is the ruler, the rightful ruler, and her general, which would be the equivalent of the guy who usurps on behalf of the CIS in the Clone Wars arc. He causes an uprising and tries to overthrow the rightful ruler, who's the queen, who's like the peaceful, actually like is a good ruler, and tries to just like take over by force. And you have to you're part of the uprising, I guess, and you can pick which side you want to go on because it's KOTOR, but
Right.
it's pretty similar. As
That is interesting. I wonder. I wonder if they took a few pages out of that. Yeah.
It's possible because KOTOR 2, KOTOR 2 went out before the Clone Wars series started. It would have been like 2004.
Right. Yeah. Well, with that, I mean, like maybe Dave recognized, hey, people like this story. Maybe we can kind of use elements of it or something. I don't know. I mean, he'd be the guy to do it.
The fact that it's the same planet, somebody somewhere involved thought it was a cool idea and decided to reuse it.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. Yeah. One of the writers on the team, perhaps. So yeah, they've essentially let their planet fall into bad leadership, and it's interesting that more recently we were talking about neutral systems in the events of the Star Wars Brotherhood book with the events on Nemoidia, because the same thing happens to Onderon. Their king doesn't pick a side in the war, doesn't choose the Republic, doesn't choose the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Inevitably, Dooku kind of shows up with his droids and a guide to replace him on the throne, and sort of in a proxy sort of way, kind of just takes over the planet, right? And so that's obviously made Saw, Steela, and very, what do you call it? Very passionate about their country, patriotic, very patriotic people to kind of rebel against the droids. So Steela, his sister, is elected as the leader of this band on Onderon, and is a key player in enabling the rebellion on Onderon to catch fire and inspire the people. And that's a whole thing. Like their whole, like what Ahsoka kind of teaches them as well is like how to be able to do that, how to create a rebellion and not make it look like it's terrorism, but actually have people be inspired by the acts of what they're doing, right?
So the people are aware that they're fighting for them and not just causing chaos.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Saw at one point tries to single-handedly and very brashly, mind you, attempt a one-man rescue mission to save their king, the original captured king. He's captured in that process and tortured with excruciating methods of electrocution. And I think this is maybe even the first time that we really see Saw being held witness to perhaps, or firsthand kind of witnessing what brutal methods of interrogation are capable of. Because
what will they do when they catch you?
What will they do when they
break you? That's right.
That's right. So
it's probably what he's thinking about was this scene.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's kind of want to bring it up because Saw himself has some pretty extreme measures of interrogating his own prisoners later in his story arc. So in an interrogation, he convinces the general of Onderon in his case, and the general who's basically, he serves the throne, essentially, original king replaced, now the general serves the new king, right? He just kind of does what he does and doesn't really think much about it until Saw really convinces him, hey, like, we have to be loyal to our original king. Like, I don't know what you're doing. Like, the people are unhappy. Like, this is your world. Like, you can't let Dooku take it over, right? And that's kind of how he puts it. And so I think he kind of gets in the head of this general and really convinces him of the case for something that happens later. And eventually him, the royal guard, and eventually Ahsoka Tano end up saving the true king and Saw and Steela and others from execution. Steela is made commanding general of all the forces on Onderon fighting the droids by the original king to command all the forces. And Saw's methods are, put very innocent people in harm's way. And it's definitely not considered, a wise decision for someone in that role, right? Because
it sounds like he's often he's willing to do means that are for the greater good, but he's sacrificing things that really shouldn't be sacrificed in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we see that become a common issue later on.
Right. Yeah, it does become a very bad habit of his to be in that. I think it's in conversation with the king, Stila, and himself, and he says something like, "We got to take the war to them," and start attacking them head on in the city. And Stila's like, "Oh, there's people down there. Like, we can't do that." And he's like, "This is war, Stila," and she's like, "No, we should draw them out to where we're at, fight them here away from the city." And the king likes her methods a lot better, obviously a lot less people at risk. So he makes her the commanding general. So that's kind of the first kind of red flag as well. Like, this is a guy who's gone through excruciating torture methods, and he's clearly kind of pulling a very extreme version of what Anakin would do, but I think Anakin less so because he's all about kind of protecting people as well. So, but he's kind of just headstrong in attacking his enemy, without any thought for consequence, right? So that's another huge character moment. Saw has eventually he comes to appreciate Steela's leadership, and she does say that she looks up to him as her older brother and acknowledges that as well. And it's not too long later in this story arc of the Clone Wars that she's tragically killed in battle. Saw takes down an HMP droid assault ship with a rocket launcher. It crashes into the cliffside where Steela's standing. And Ahsoka pushes her, Ahsoka tries to pull her up with the Force. But this crashed ship shoots a blaster at the ground, or at her shoulder or whatever. Ahsoka goes down and lets Steela fall, and she ends up falling to her death. And it's not Ahsoka's fault at all, but Saw definitely holds some blame on himself for the incident, for firing the rocket at the ship that ended up crashing into that cliffside in the first place. So that's definitely...
This is pretty dark for a children's animated show.
It is for sure. Yeah, this guy just killed his sister incidentally, and no one was able to save her, and it's like, dang, like that's terrible, right? And I think like
he's probably regretting his words. Hey, consequences of war. Jeez.
Right. And this was at the very end of the arc too, like the final 4th episode of the arc in the last 10 minutes, so or 5 minutes or whatever it was. So it's really surprising. Like, it's a surprising moment in the show, and I remember being very surprised when I saw it, because it took me off guard a little bit, with like, oh wow, I didn't expect that at all. Like,
yeah,
So the death of Steela empowers Onderon and Saw, of course, to keep doing what he's doing, except he's now fired off in a new direction of without his sister to kind of, the voice of reason sort of thing. And the king, who's returned to his throne, the droids leave, and her death is really the capstone for a free Onderon. And that's a whole nother kind of thing that comes up later in the show. But as far as the focus on Saw goes, like that's really kind of where he gets his origin story. And
you can see, like, I know we're talking about his turning point, and I always considered his sister's death to be like the first really big marker.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So that's definitely another huge thing. Having Steela die like that was it comes up later, but that's really a big deal to that character as well. Not too long later, Saw Gerrera and his followers have been labeled as insurgents for taking action against the proclamation of the New Order. I wasn't aware that there was a name for this, but that's actually what they called the moment when Emperor Palpatine reformed the Republic into the Empire. That's the official term for it, is the proclamation of the New Order. Tarkin sends Clone Force 99, otherwise known as the Bad Batch, to eliminate Saw Gerrera and his band of rebels, who recently have been up to no good in resisting this proclamation of New Order. The clones actually don't know that it's it's Saw Gerrera and his people. They just think that it's a group of insurgents. But they get there to Onderon, they realize that, oh, there's kids there. Like there's kids, there's regular people. They don't look like a menace. So, but they end up getting captured, and Saw has a conversation with them. He says that the clones once helped him win over his planet, and he gives them a choice, lets them go. And he also mentions that the Clone Wars took a lot from him and a lot from his people. And clearly he's edged a little bit since his last appearance. They changed the visual look of the character a little bit. His voice is a bit gruffer and a bit softer, how we know maybe Forrest Whitaker to be, but not quite Rogue One level. It's interesting how they do the transition over time.
I'm trying to remember in his appearance in Bad Batch. Does he have his cybernetic body yet?
No, that doesn't come until much later. And we actually never see the moment on screen when he gets those implants. So
Okay, because I hope they do explain that at some point. Do they at least say what it was? It's one of my questions I've always been wondering.
yeah, I don't actually know. It didn't come up when I was going through this list, so I think maybe it's a story for another time, sort of deal. But he also mentions the impending civil war ahead and that they need to pick a side, which is kind of also like a huge, like, oh yeah, that's another huge thing.
What's coming?
Yeah, and he's taken a note out of the King's book, like the King of Onderon, right? Who's probably now since been killed or whatever. But he took a note out of his book when it came to, the consequences of him not picking a side, and the planet ended up falling into the wrong hands, right? So Saw's definitely picked the side of fighting this new leadership, and
At the same time, though, I don't think he knows anything else.
No, he certainly doesn't. He's been fighting for 3 years or so, trying to take back his world or fight opposing forces that have tried to retake it over again. After the Free Onderon moment, after Steela's death, I'm sure the droids came back, trying to take it back. So yeah. Do you want to? So I grabbed this next little bit off of the I think it was the wiki, because I haven't read what is it again? Oh no, sorry. I have read Catalyst, Rogue One. It's been so long since I read it. I forget. Did you read that book or not?
I did as well. Yeah, right before Rogue One came out.
Okay. Do you want to catch us up on the next section there?
Sure. Yeah, this will be a refresher for me as well, because I know it has been a while since Rogue One came out. So a few years after the Purge, a friend who had known the Urso family since Jin's birth asked Gerrera to go in his stead to help his friends. He also knew Gerrera. Gerrera met and smuggled Lyra, Galen, and Jin Urso off Coruscant and set up a homestead at Lamu. Urso stayed vigilant while living on Lamu, forming an escape plan in case Krennic found them. The plan was for Lyra and Jin Urso to hide in a shelter dug under a cave and in contact with Gerrera for extraction. So this was, if everyone remembers, in Rogue One, when Jin is hiding in that cave, and then Saw Gerrera shows up and saves her because she's left all alone. This was kind of filling in the background to that.
Right. Yeah, and that was such a great book. Anyone who really loves Rogue One, it's almost like Catalyst is just like a must read. It was just, I remember it to be so good, and it was one of the earlier novels that they did in the canon. I think it was part of like Wave 2 or something like that after.
Yeah, it was pretty early on.
It was pretty early on, yeah. But it was amazing. It was we got a lot more out of Galen Urso, who was such a cool character played by Mads Mikkelsen.
Yeah,
in the movie.
Such a good casting.
Oh man, it was so good. And I it was a shame that we don't see more of him in the movie. And so anyone who appreciates that character a lot, you'll really enjoy Catalyst, a Rogue One novel, because he's like kind of the focus point of that whole initial backstory between him and Krennic. And it was an amazing book. So yeah,
it really fills in the what was in his head leading up to the idea of him like intentionally putting a flaw into the Death Star.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So sometime later, Gerrera and several of his partisans traveled to Kashyyyk. There they discovered that one of the Empire's refineries was using the Rorschach tree sap to make a powerful compound. Following this, they met Jedi Padawan Cal Kestis, who they asked for help in their attempts to free the Wookiees. So this is straight out of Jedi Fallen Order, and it's a very small appearance. But you most recently played Jedi Fallen Order. I played it a little longer ago. So what do you remember from that moment where you kind of surprisingly see Saw Gerrera?
Pretty much just that. It was surprising. I wasn't expecting him to be there. Like the rest of his band of rebels are a lot more involved in that level, and you have to come back to the planet of at least twice, I think. So you're involved with them taking the base back and freeing the Wookiees the whole time, but it was just so brief. I'm not sure if it was in person or if he was just over like a hologram.
No, he was there in person, but I forget if he was later shown in a hologram or not. But I do remember he was there kind of in front of Cal Kestis, and there was even a moment where he asked Cal to join his partisans.
That's right. I do remember that part.
And then he declines, much to Saw's kind of disappointment. But interesting to see, Saw's respect for the Jedi kind of extends from his moments in the Clone Wars. I mean, he's been taught all he knows by the brief moments that he's had with Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Captain Rex, right? So,
and it's worth noting that in Jedi Fallen Order, Saw already has his cybernetic suit.
Yes, he's got the suit. I don't think he has the leg, but he's got the suit, the one that he's known for wearing. Yeah, the one he's known for wearing in Rogue One. Yeah. So between Bad Batch and Jedi Fallen Order, which takes place 4 to 5 years later, is kind of that transition moment for that character and that costume change. So Saw was finally tasked with protecting Jyn after Lyra was killed, and Galen was tasked by Orson Krennic to continue his work on the Death Star. At the very beginning of Rogue One, we see that flashback scene, and it's the moment where Jyn has to hide in the hole that this moment that was set up in the Rogue One Catalyst book. The escape plan comes to fruition, and Jyn is hidden away successfully and doesn't fall into the clutches of Krennic. Saw comes and collects her, and we just assume, there's a big time jump in the movie, and it jumps over so much stuff, and it's kind of insinuated as to what happened later in the film when they come face to face again. But the novel for Solo, the expanded edition, as well as Rebel Rising, actually fills in the gaps a little bit. So Saw brings Jyn to the planet Rey, where he had an outpost set up that was still mostly empty of occupants. And he revealed his dislike for droids to her, which is kind of a nice callback to the Clone Wars. The day after her arrival, Jyn finds a training ground set up with hanging husks of dilapidated droids used for target practice by Saw. Jyn then asks Saw for help in training to fight, and on the third day of her stay, she gets the chance to practice her hand-to-hand skills on several sets of stormtrooper armor that Saw sets up for her benefit. Another moment later on, Saw allows Jyn to accompany him when he negotiates with Enfys Nest for coaxium that was obtained from the Syndicate Crimson Dawn. So, following the events of Solo, in the novelization, which is referred to as the expanded edition, now we know one of the buyers that Enfys Nest actually sells to, or let's say one of the other rebel cells that Enfys Nest kind of helps feed with, which right now we're seeing kind of like at this point in time, around the timeline of Solo, is like kind of the early seeds of the rebellion, and we also get those subtle hints in Kenobi as well. If I know we talked about it extensively as well, if you remember all that.
Yeah, it's true. And as we learned there, it was kind of started with multiple cells. So this would be one of the cells that are then combined to give the name Rebel Alliance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So I guess as we learn, the rest of the rebels don't agree with Saw's tactics, so I don't think they ever officially become one of the Alliance.
There's a few moments
falling out.
Yeah, there's a few moments that come up which I think I think they're kind of like slowly breaking points. This moment here, let me see. I think this comes from the Rebel Rising book. Saw and several other members of his partisans were hired by Aran Orida, which is a Zabrak rebel, to go to a planet called Inusagi and infiltrate the Sakula Blossom Festival. What a mouthful.
Oh my gosh. This sounds like an EU novel if I've ever heard.
Yeah. Forgive me if I don't say that again. So Saw's mission that he's hired for is to kill Governor Kor Tofirin, I believe it's pronounced, which is a close friend of Palpatine's. He and his partisans massacre the festival, killing Imperials, the local chiefess, as well as many guests and civilians, just to send a message to the Empire. And I think this is one of the big moments that's like, he kind of represents the rebellion, which kind of stands for hope. We can't have him killing people, right?
Yeah, civilians.
Yeah, that's kind of a bad deal. So as Jin matures, Saw also becomes increasingly paranoid over time. And we see that paranoia in Rogue One. He fears that Jin would eventually be recognized as the daughter of a known Imperial collaborator, which is Galen Erso, of course, and thus exploited and be used for ransom against Galen. To help prevent this, and in measure to protect Jin, as well as Galen Erso, who's currently being held by the Empire, Saw tortures his own people, the partisans, for assessing whether or not they know Jin's identity, even kills and disposes of one in the process, which is also a huge red flag. It's like the sanity of this guy is sort of going off the charts, right? In terms of how crazy he is, you know? And with the constant worry of others finding out about Jin's identity, he decides that when Jin is 16, he's going to abandon her in a bunker with nothing more than a knife and a blaster for protection. He instructs her to wait in that bunker until morning, as by which time he's totally gone. And he comes to justify this by telling himself that she could do it. She could survive by herself without his aid anymore. He's trained her to do all she can to do that. And he kind of justifies it like that.
Man, they skipped over a lot then, huh? In the movie.
Yeah, they really did. I mean, all the part where he goes a bit nuts, like, you know.
Because you get just such a brief moment before you see him as the more like paranoid version of himself.
Yeah.
So you're kind of left thinking, like in the film, that he's just always like that.
Right. What we know from Clone Wars is like, how do you get from that to being who he is, right? And this is kind of like, you know, as we've gone, we're about halfway down the list now, and it's like, okay, now I'm starting to see the change, right? So even 3 years later or so, before Rogue One, Gerrera managed to bomb and detonate at a residence of one Marf Quash Panaka. You'll remember Panaka from Phantom Menace, the Queen's or Padme's.
Captain Panaka.
Captain Panaka. Yeah, so he ends up becoming a Moff because he's quite good friends with Palpatine. And the bomb achieves its objective in killing Moff Panaka, who is supposed to, you know, of course, one of Palpatine's close friends from being in the same homeworld and all of that stuff. And the timing of the bomb actually narrowly misses Princess Leia, who was only in the room moments earlier saying a farewell to the Moff. I guess she was there on business, senatorial business. The bomb barely misses her. And Briha, her adoptive mother, of course, kind of assumes that it's him, and correctly assumes so because it was. And this was all in the Princess Leia of Alderaan book. But it was a mention. It wasn't directly in the book, but it was a mention that I just had to throw in there because it was such a big thing. It's like, you know, killing this character, particularly Panaka, but then also almost killing Princess Leia in the process. That's a huge deal, right?
That's crazy, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that Captain Panaka became a Moff.
Yeah, I think in the EU he also became a Moff. So it's one of those things that kind of goes under the radar a little bit. But
yeah, loyalty switch sides, huh?
I guess loyalty just never changes. I mean, like
just to Naboo, I guess, to the extreme.
He's always served Palpatine in some remote way, right? Like he served Padme and
more Padme.
Yeah, I mean, he served Senator Palpatine when he was senator, and then when the transition happened, he still served the senator of Naboo. But then after that senator died, I'm sure he was probably promoted by Palpatine, who was a close friend of, having served him, and people said, "Hey, I need mops, right? I need new people to, we're getting rid of all these clone guys. You got a new job, buddy."
Yeah.
So he probably gave him the promotion. It was like, all right, get a little more cheddar cheese going on, and here you go. So he becomes a Moff and ends up getting killed, and that's why we never see him in the later movies. So, which brings us to Star Wars Rebels. When was the last time you saw Star Wars Rebels and his appearance in there?
Admittedly, I'm due for a rewatch of the series. It has been a little while. I think I was going through it about 2 years ago. I started a rewatch. I'm not sure if I finished it or not, though.
Right. Well, it's certainly been a while for me, so I had to give these a rewatch as well. So let's run through the first arc from what is this, season 3, episode 12 and 13, and then we'll talk about the season 4 appearance. So Saw investigates a mysterious disappearance of the Geonosians on Geonosis. And as we know, some lore experts out there, we know that the Empire gassed the whole planet and pretty much just extinguished the bugs after they began to construct the initial parts of the Death Star. When that project kind of moved on elsewhere for the final phases, they didn't need the Geonosians spilling all their secrets, so they killed them all. Nobody knows about this. So he was there to investigate that. And his whole team is wiped out by someone. It turns out to be a Geonosian, which Ezra Bridger later names Click Clack. Saw is actually the sole survivor of that investigation. And Saw is quite angry about the whole event, losing his team and everything, and rightfully so. But it's an interesting moment when he meets the crew that goes for the first time. Ezra also noticed that he holds on to the memory of his lost sister, Steela, in the form of a hollow picture that he keeps with him in his pocket. And he drops it at one point. Ezra picks it up, turns it on, and asks who it is and everything. It's like a huge emotional moment. And then his methods of trying to interrogate the Geonosian Click-Clack goes way too far when he threatens to destroy the last queen egg of the Geonosians, which is pretty much the key to that species' survival. But the dispute is dissolved when the Empire attacks, and a valuable lesson on how allies may not share the same values. Kind of an interesting take. I think Kanan says that because it's kind of true. Like, I guess there's a lot of people who could be on the same side of something, but not everyone might share the same values about going about it, right?
Yeah, that seems, again, to be a reoccurring theme with Saw, where he's more ruthless to get the ends of his means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also something we've seen in the Clone Wars on a variety of occasions. Particularly being, I guess, the tolerance for certain means of what we might call an ally. I mean, like if you look at Ventress, for example, let's talk DC for a moment. I mean, look at Batman, all right? Like Batman doesn't kill people, but he's out for a specific goal and purpose of like stopping crime in Gotham. And, I could go deeper, but there's allies that he might have which would kill people and get the same job done. Marvel's got the same idea. Like you got characters like the Punisher, and then you got characters like, name one. I mean, like, people like Spider-Man. Like Spider-Man and the Punisher are very different characters, but they're both in their own way kind of a protagonist of their own story, right? And they're both out to get the real bad guys. So Saw is kind of one of those people. It's like, yeah, the rebellion, it's not so one-sided. Like it does have some underbellies, right? And Saw is one of those dirtier, grimier people that's just like obviously fighting the Empire on his own behalf, like for the greater cause, but he's going about it in a way that harms people in a bad way. And it's important to
harming
kind of remember
himself
that.
too. Right?
Yeah,
Or else
totally.
he wouldn't be having this growing paranoia and be turning on his own people.
Yeah, absolutely. So after a failed mission, this is now season 4 of Star Wars Rebels, in season 4, episode 3 and 4. After a failed mission that Hera Syndulla runs with Wedge, a debatable hologram message from Saw tells the rebellion on Yavin 4 base that they'll lose the fight if they don't do what's necessary. And Kanan says it's not whether or not we fight, it's how we choose to fight that matters. And this was kind of that quote that I kind of briefly mentioned earlier, was like, this is a game-changing moment because it really puts into perspective of like where Saw is. He does choose to fight, but he doesn't choose to fight in a very
in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. And of course to him it's like a matter of right is only a matter of an opinion, but to the
it's almost like Saw's more out to hurt the Empire and not there to save people from the Empire.
Yeah, like if I look at Leia's perspective of the rebellion, her final words in Rogue One, and when she looks at the plans for the Death Star, and someone asks her, what is that? And she says, hope. And it's a weird thing because like you're looking at the plans to a death weapon that can blow up a planet and destroy billions of lives. Like I wouldn't call that hope, but I mean, I think the greater purpose of having those plans and knowing how to destroy it, the thing is probably, it's for the rebellion's cause of like spreading hope across the galaxy that there can be a free galaxy again. Right.
Oh man, since we touched on that, so if she refers to the stolen Death Star plans as hope, then does that mean the title A New Hope is referring to the Death Star plans? Because I always thought that referred to Luke.
I think it was just a subtle nod to the next movie's title. I don't think it was like anything directly trying to link it to the Death Star plans or anything. But yeah, I mean it's that's certainly funny to note. Yeah. But yeah, compared to Saw's way about looking at it, I mean, like if I were to say like, oh, what would Saw do? He would probably just smash the plans right there. I mean, like, it's like hey, well,
oh yeah,
let's just get rid of these so that the Empire can't build it again, right? Which would do nothing because they've already started building another one anyways. So it's really just kind of his immediate decision to want to prevent the Empire from achieving their goals consistently, right? By put whatever he needs to do to get the job done, right? He'll just do it. So,
no sacrifice is too big.
Yeah, no sacrifice is too big. After a failed Mon Mothma gets very fired up at this, and at Saw Gerrera and his extreme tactics for targeting civilian populated areas just to kill the targets that he's after. His tactics get in the head of everyone who's frustrated with the rebellion's less aggressive methods because they're clearly not doing the best job that they could be to fighting the Empire. Because of Hera's failed mission, there's a variety of other reasons, but it's all kind of on Saw related. And when it comes to dealing things like blowing up an Imperial relay, is what they want to do. Saw's opinion is let's go after it, let's blow it up. We don't do what's necessary, the Empire's going to win. Saw ends up later in that arc saving the crew of the Ghost and blows up the relay station. And he's investigating the mystery weapon that the Empire has been building. And since his time on Geonosis, he's come to suspect that it's a super weapon. He recruits Sabine and Ezra to help him investigate a space station with a cargo that's being loaded onto a civilian cruiser. After liberating some prisoners, they find a giant kyber crystal. This is an interesting story arc because it's a bit of a callback to that canceled Clone Wars arc. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah. Christophersis something?
Yeah. Crystal Crisis on Utapau. Yeah.
Yeah.
The unfinished Clone Wars episodes.
Yeah, I remember this because they it was on Utapau, and then they have the giant crystal, the giant kyber crystal on the cart, and they're trying to get it up to the mountain, up that like there's like almost like a mountain trail. Mm-hmm. And what eventually ends up happening is if you shoot the crystal, then it like increases the power and like shoots it out everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. So for
Yeah, but
anyone who's
that one, I believe they blew it up. Did they not?
they did, yeah. In the Clone Wars arc, they blew it up. But yeah, so it's been long known that that Palpatine, ever since Attack of the Clones, Palpatine's been building this Death Star slowly behind the scenes, right? So this is just another one of those stories where it's like, oh, here's a little bit of someone's caught onto it, right? And on this cruiser, they find that another giant kyber crystal. The Death Star is powered by many, the laser that is. After Ezra tells Saw they'll prevent the Empire from getting the crystal, he stuns them both and formulates a plan to use the crystal, which will help him find the Empire's superweapons. So Ezra thinks that they should maybe just destroy it or something. I kind of forget, but Saw wants to hold on to it and use the crystal to ride the ship wherever it's going to try and find whatever this crystal it needs to go, right? So he wants to find where this thing, what it's en route to. But that doesn't end up working out because the Empire intercepts the ship and kind of puts him in a bit of a tight spot. And so he sabotages the crystal, which makes it a ticking time bomb. Leaves Ezra, Sabine, and the prisoners that they found aboard the ship, and formulates his escape, and leaves them to formulate their own escape when they choose not to go with him, because he says they can't bring the innocent people with him, which are the prisoners. And that whole thing ends. It all ends well. They end up getting off. Hera comes in to save the day, and all the prisoners that they rescue end up joining the rebellion. So Saw ended up kind of
being in the wrong.
Yeah, of course. With his campaigns against the Empire become increasingly brutal, Alliance High Command, at the urging of Mon Mothma, formally censored Gerrera and severed all official ties with the partisans. By this time, Gerrera had lost his right leg, struggled to walk on a low-grade cybernetic replacement. His lungs had also been damaged, and confining him to a pressurized suit of armor requires him to regularly take supplementary oxygen and breathe from a mask. So that's kind of how we catch up to his appearance in Rogue One. But prior to that, do you want to actually? I pulled this straight from the Wikipedia. It's from an appearance in the book, which is called Guardians of the Wills. Do you want to take us through that?
Sure, yep. So having previously learned that the Empire's massive kyber crystal had come from Jeddah, Gerrera relocated his militia to the moon, feeling that it was an appropriate place to bring his rebellion, as it was sacred world to many different galactic religions. Due to the Imperials defiling many religious temples and artifacts in the pursuit of kyber crystals, small local insurgent cells had begun forming in the holy city of Nijeda in opposition of the occupation. From his new base of operations in the catacombs of Cadera, just a half day's walk outside the holy city, Gerrera began recruiting and organizing the local insurgencies under the umbrella of his partisans. During his time, he also held command over a pair of UT-60D U-Wing troop transports and 6 T-65 X-Wings, calling them Cavern Angels. Calling them the Cavern Angels. Gerrera began deploying his squadron to hit and run air raids against the Imperial facilities of the Holy City, as well as the outlying Imperial-controlled Kyber mines.
Yeah, so that catches us up to the next little bit here, if you want to read that, which is the moment that he comes face to face with Chirrut Imwe and Baze Malbus.
It's interesting, though, just looking through what happens here, because if he really feels like he's part of the Rebel Alliance, using all the same kind of gear and ships and stuff. Because when we see him in Rogue One, they feel like they're a completely different group.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of this is a key moment too, where he really decides to make his base. Why he goes to Jeddah, right? Like why he goes to that particular location. I never made that connection before, but the fact that he finds out kind of where that kyber crystal that he found in Star Wars Rebels comes from, that's the link, right? And that's what sends him there. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So yeah, Guardians of the Wills. That's an interesting junior novel. Let's hit part 2 here. You want to take us through that one?
Yeah, so among the local insurgents, Gerrera recruited were Guardians of the Wills, Chirrut Imwe, and Baze Malbus, as we know them from Rogue One, whom they enticed into joining by providing much-needed provisions for the orphanage run by Imwe and Malbus's friend Kea and Keely Gim. Over several months, the partisans attacked the Imperial occupiers, leading to harsher and harsher reprisals from the Empire. The Star Destroyer that had previously orbited high over Jeddah descended to rest right above the Holy City, and the number of stormtroopers, tanks, and walkers on patrol on the streets increased significantly. Imwe and Malbus came to Gerrera asking for assistance, stealing a spacecraft so the Gim sisters could flee and the planet with their orphans. A group of partisans led by Beezer Fortuna, must be cousin of Bib,
Yeah, it must be.
helped Imwe and Malbus steal a Sentinel-class shuttle. Under the orders of Gerrera, Fortuna and the other partisans attempted to double-cross Imwe and Malbus, wishing to use the shuttle to blow up the Star Destroyer over the city. Imwe and Malbus were able to talk the partisans out of taking the shuttle, allowing the orphans to escape Jeddah. However, this led to Gerrera parting ways with Imwe and Malbus.
It's interesting that Saw Gerrera had a run-in with the Guardians of the Wills that we know from Rogue One, because I never actually knew that they knew each other prior to the moment that they're taken captive and thrown in the prison block of Saw's base.
No, I didn't either. They didn't really do a very good job of explaining that.
No, yeah, because it's your Imwe, when he gets the bag thrown over his head, he's like, "Oh, I'm blind."
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so it's always a really funny moment. But it's like I always just thought they didn't know each other before, but I guess they have had their single run-in previously.
It's also interesting that it was Gerrera's fault that the Star Destroyer was so close to the city itself.
Yeah,
because I know that's such a iconic shot from Rogue One, and seeing that Star Destroyer, like the presence of it right over the city.
Right, absolutely. That finally brings us to Rogue One, where Jin is sent to negotiate with Saw and is caught up in a skirmish in Jeddah City. Jin and Cassian, along with Imwe and Malbus, who had been caught up in the fighting, were brought to Saw's headquarters in the catacombs of Qadira. Saw would only see Jin, and his mistrustfulness causes him to question the nature of Bodhi Rook, the Imperial messenger spy on behalf of Galen Erso. And he also questions Jin, who he thinks is there to kill him. Jin is just there to collect the message, and Saw asks her why she does not believe in the dream of freedom throughout the galaxy anymore. And she tells him about that he abandoned her at the age of 16, the whole leaving her with a blaster and a knife and all that. It's really dented her faith in the rebellion, and interesting to see how his actions have really rubbed off on a bad way when it comes to her perspective of the rebellion. And then he shows her the message of her father, reveals the weakness of the Empire superweapon, the Death Star. Meanwhile, the city of Jeddah is targeted by the Death Star and is destroyed. With Saw's worst fears being realized, he perishes in the aftermath of the blast. And that is the story of Saw Gerrera. So what do we think of this character?
I think there's some important missing pieces and some stuff that they kind of skipped over that in the film, so they probably shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's some really important character moments that I think were really cool, and I wish they had explained it better.
With Andor right around the corner, it's worth noting the timeline of that show. 5 years before Rogue One, which I believe is before his Star Wars Rebels appearance, or maybe just after. So it's definitely after he's abandoned Jyn Erso, I'm pretty sure.
Saw Gerrera is just such an interesting character, though, because he has such good intentions and at the start, and he kind of just gets lost in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He does kind of, doesn't he?
Kind of falls to the dark side in his own way, right? It becomes like
Yeah,
obsessed with the end goal.
yeah. That's a great way to put it. He's definitely in his own way. I mean, like we always think of like falling to the dark side of like either like it can only happen to a Jedi or a Sith, but I guess it really could happen to anyone, and this is like his way of doing what it takes to do the job he thinks he's kind of destined to do, much like Anakin's obsession with protecting Padme, right? Like he's kind of falling into his own pit with believing in the cause, while he's tearing up the streets of every neighborhood, killing anyone in his path just to damage the Empire, right? So
That's exactly it.
It'll be very interesting to see, with Andor being such a gritty show, it'll be very interesting to see kind of like where that character is. And as to what we've all talked about with the transition of him going from sane to crazy, like just kind of, what it's going to look like in Andor, what role he has to play. Yeah.
Yeah, and hoping that they show part of that. I hope that there's a moment in the show that will show some transition, maybe not just of his mental capacities and paranoia, but also his his bodily reconstruction. Maybe he'll lose his leg or something in the show.
Yeah, that would be he doesn't show up in Rebels without the
right,
leg,
so it
but
just depends on the timeline.
Yeah, and it really depends if they want to do that whole retroactively changing
It does
stuff,
everything.
because it does happen.
If he gets the bodysuit, then it will have to take place before.
I have many questions
Jedi
about that
Fallen
bodysuit.
Order.
Yeah, I have many questions about the bodysuit, because the bodysuit, it doesn't have an issue with his lungs in Rebels or Fallen Order, so it's kind of weird, because like it's the same suit that's been pressurized later, but I wonder if it maybe that's just something in the visual dictionary and they just decided to ignore that when they made his appearance in Fallen Order and Rebels. So there's a lot to speculate on. It's going to be really, really cool to see that character again. Any last things to bring up before we wrap it up here?
I hope that if they're going to go the route, I really want to see Forrest Whitaker. Did such a good job. I really want Forrest Whitaker to be involved in some way or another.
Yeah.
Because live action, right? So let's bring him back.
Let's bring him back. Yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks for coming back on the show, and we will catch you in the next one.
We'll see you out there. Keep flying.
All right, and thank you to all our listeners for tuning in once again to Star Wars Escape Pod. We always love that feedback, so feel free to send us an email at swescapepodcast@gmail.com. We want those emails, and we want those voicemails, so hit the link in the description below. Send us a voicemail. You can follow the Twitter at swescapepodcast, and let us know how you like our What Happened series, as well as Saw Gerrera. We'll catch you in the next episode, and may the Force be with you.